Hello, and welcome to the Storied Arcs podcast. I am your co-host, Mike.
And I'm your co-host, Alex.
And today, for our deep dive discussion, we are covering Descender Volumes 1 and 2, or issues 1 through 11. I think Alex and I have hyped this so much that we're both eager to just dive in. But where we hinted at last time, let's just pick right up there. Sure. I've said that 5 or 6 people, and I think I did the math, it's 5 people I've given trade number 1 to, 1 person I gave first issue only to, and you had a note on that.
Yeah. So as much as I love Lemire as a writer and creator in general, I don't think he's a great first issue guy. And this is no knock in general. I think first issues are hard, but I mean, like I think Brian K. Vaughan may be the best first issue creator in his first issue of anything, any of his books, like they are whoppers. Like it's like a great pilot, you know, and not great pilots on television shows don't always lead to great shows down the line. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. But you know, there's a reason why people talk about what are the best pilots in TV history. You know, what's that first one that gets you hooked? And I think Brian K. Vaughan is great at that. I think
interestingly, like those best pilot awards always go to shows that ended up being great, even though there are great pilots.
Yes.
Because you'll never hear anyone say Studio 60 was one of the best pilots of all time.
But it is.
Even though it is.
The pilot is phenomenal. The show is not great. But yeah,
and I think you're saying like Brian K. Vaughan, I'm like, I totally agree with that. He's one of the best first issue writers, but also his series always end up being great.
Yes, they do.
And I think one of the best first issue writers whose series kind of peter out and fade is like a Scott Snyder. Like he's a great concept kicking down the door.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. Great first issue. Yeah. But they trail off so often that you don't remember how great the first issue was.
There's a wavier track record for someone like Snyder in terms of the follow-up and things like that. But Lemire, I think, is someone in the way that I read it and the way that I've consumed this stuff is that it's an okay first issue. It gets you in. And I've always felt that his series take a little while for me to get into the story. And then he'll end his first arc in a way that is, oh, wait a minute, maybe the book you're reading isn't the one you thought you were reading. Like he's able to flip the story on you and make you realize that the story the story you thought he was telling isn't the one you're actually going to get. And I think he has an ability to do that to set you up for the next arc, as well as anybody. One book that I think about, short-lived book he did with Phil Hester called Family Tree.
Yeah.
Is an interesting book for the first arc. And then the first arc ends and I had that moment of like, oh, wait, this isn't the story I think it's going to be. This is now a bit different, and I think now a better story. And that was all his setup to make that turn and give you the true kind of punch of the story. And I think that's what Lemire can do. So I think giving someone in this case, I think this is be one where I'd want to give someone that first trade.
Right.
Say,
I think that's fair because I think certainly by the end of the first trade, you're hooked.
Yes, or you're either in or you're out by then. You have a fair read. You know what the book. There are so many elements involved in that first story. There, I mean, you know, from I mean, gosh, this is some of the elements here. So we get all the characters that we get. We get the setup, this idea of like a robot god, a robot heaven kind of thing. Right. Or the idea that Tim has his dreams, there's this Messiah-ish complex to it, right? You know, we get the backstory, we get Dr. Kwan's backstory of like, yeah, I plagiarized all this stuff from a source that I don't even know what it's from. You know, the idea that their robotics came from ancient robotics, you know, or at least ancient from their viewpoint. So we get some setup and some backstory into the world. We get to know I'm going to say Tesla, but I know it's not Tesla.
I know.
Yeah.
You corrected multiple times.
Yeah. Tesla. we see Commander Tesla, that Captain Tesla. We get her backstory a little bit there. So you get so many pieces of the story by the end of that first arc. Again, I think that you're either in or you're out right there. And I think that's the strength that Lemire has as a writer. And of course it ends there with meeting Tim 22, right? Another Tim character there. So even though we're discussing this in 2-volume terms, to a new reader, I think if you tell someone invest in this first arc, in these first 6 issues here, this will tell you if you're in the series or not, and if you're bought in, more so than I think just an opening issue, a first issue. So I think that's where the strength of this series lies.
Yeah, well, and curiously, and I'm kind of calling myself out here, even though it's a past version of me. I looked back at my, I don't know, 2016, 2017 review of this series as I was reading it. And I went in strong on volume 1, and in volume 2, my notes were like, I'm not really feeling it. Like, maybe I'm not going to stick with the series, but I'll give it one more trade. And then I was hooked. But I think upon reread,
I was going to say, at the time, you thought 2 was kind of a letdown.
I did, yeah. And I think
like The Wire, huh? Like, season 2, not so great. Yeah.
Right.
But in hindsight now, looking back at the whole thing,
I've changed again. And not just out of like a diehard, I'm a Lemire fan, I have to take everything he gives me and love it. But because of he got us in with like a lot of action and intrigue and world building. I didn't like volume 2 the first time because I thought it was a little too exposition-y. There was not that many beats happening, and I kept waiting for our characters to be united, because they're basically, now it's like, okay, well, they're separated. They're both on converging paths. Either that's the last issue of the series, or like get it over with and give us the next plot thing. But it felt like Tim and Andy being separated wasn't the ultimate series. The ultimate series is this harvester thing, but 2 is kind of, it felt like it was gilding the lily between like Tim and Andy.
Now that you said, I think that's actually pretty fair. So what you're saying is like, we the reader now have been introduced to Andy, so we know where he is.
There's no point in us delaying their meeting.
But Tim doesn't. Tim is looking for it. That's
well, now so Andy's looking for Tim.
So it's like yes.
It's almost like you're building the romantic tension or whatever, but it's like it's not ultimately. Well, on one hand, it is ultimately about their relationship. On the other hand, it's not.
But it's about their relationship, but it isn't about them searching for each other.
Right. It's not Finding Nemo.
Yeah, the whole point. Yeah. So I think that is. I think what you said about exposition, there is some of that there, because volume 2 is there's a lot of download there. There's a lot goes on there.
It's a lot more reading.
Yeah, there's as we get just being in his hidden robot colony and seeing what the Hardwire and that group is about. There is a lot of download there because they get there's the one spy in the UGC. We heard the Hardwire, and then that's their only mention in the first volume, and then volume 2 is all them. At least when it comes to Tim's story, Tim and Tesla and all that stuff, and Quan. But yeah, there's a lot you have to get through there. That's the most like really direct world building. You say that he does in terms of heavy lifting of like, we have to get through this stuff here. We have to set up who these people are, what they want. We have to set up Tim 21 versus Tim 22. We got to put these pieces in place here, versus what they did, what I think they did in other parts of this volume, in volume 1, when they set up some of the relationship between the various planets.
Yes.
That's less foregrounded, less overt, like when you have it in their council meetings or whatever, or the way they talk about the Nishian, like the scrappers and maybe black market, things like that. You get more context to fill in how these worlds interact with each other and how the various citizens of those worlds interact with each other, versus here with the hardwired the robots, where they just kind of got to get to the point and they have to just explain everything to you. And it does feel a little heavier handed. So I can see how past you would have at the time been like, this seems like a chore, you know?
Well, and Lemire, I think it's fair to say, is known for letting the story, the pictures tell the story.
Mm-hmm.
He is a writer that doesn't use thought bubbles. Everything is
Narration,
either spoken or it is it's either spoken or it's depicted.
It's
there's not a lot of internal.
That is definitely true. That is definitely true. He's not big on narration.
And so in a book where you have to get a lot of exposition out and you can't have characters thinking exposition to themselves, it's a lot of walk and talk.
Yeah, it's a lot of talking. Yeah,
which is great in a TV show or a movie. I love a walk and talk.
Yeah,
banter. In a comic book, it's like, I'm not sure this is the best use of the medium. To just have characters walking through a robot headquarters, explaining their evil plans or whatever. So anyway,
I would say the
I
one
have
thing
changed my mind.
I don't think it's bad. I think, but you see them try and do some different things when it comes to some of the exposition and backstory. Where I think we see it twice. We see it once in volume 1 and again in volume 2, which is kind of the flashback sequences that kind of go monochromatic, and the way that they deploy it with kind of every other page, where it's like, full color page of the now, and then we have a monochromatic page in the back, and we get kind of the history of both Tim and then Andy and kind of how they met when Andy was a child and things like that. So they're trying to do different in terms of how to get this information out there. They're trying to do different things to try to break it up so it is more palatable. So you don't have a full on, just like here's a flashback issue, where
right.
we're doing it in different ways. So you can see him making an effort to approach the story in different ways, in order so it doesn't feel so maybe as monotonous of just here's an information download,
Right. And I think it would be interesting to read this side by side with Sweet Tooth, where Sweet Tooth is 6 trades, plus the return, which
I think so.
Count.
I think it's broken up. I think it's broken up into 6.
It's roughly 6 trades, and it's like trade 5, where it's like, okay, that event that like happened, way back when, that has been the shadow cast over this whole story. You get that in trade 5 of 6.
Yeah.
Whereas before we meet our characters, we get the harvester attack, even if it's just a little glimpse here.
Yeah.
It's like before the title page.
Yeah. We get the thing. This is what happens. And
right.
You don't need to know everything else. Just you understand very quickly what the big event was.
Right. Whereas like Sweet Tooth, the big event was these animal hybrid children are being born.
Yeah.
But there was actually a reason for it that he intended to give us. Yeah. We just had to wait until the series was almost over to find out. Mm-hmm. And so now there's still, he did it differently, but there's still plenty of intrigue around the harvesters. Now we get to wonder the questions that the characters are wondering about it.
Yeah. Yeah. Like why is their base code the same as Tim?
That's the huge one, and that's in the first trade, right?
Well, and it comes back to that ancient robot that they found on whichever planet was the desolate one, the one that's all desert and ruin. There were archaeologists digging through there, and they scanned that AI, which kind of looks like the robots they used in the iRobot movie. But again, it's that idea of like. In the back matter or the one of the data pages at the end, they list the various colonies, the various planet colonies, and one of them specifically mentions like this was the original colony of Earth. Like this is so one of them. I think the planet that Tesla's from is the colony from Earth. So I think this is meant to be the future descendants of our planet move out into space and all that. So the idea that their society has advanced so far with robotics and all of that, but there was a time when they didn't have robotics because their ancestors had robotics, and whatever it was, they buried it away, and yet society evolved again to once again have robotics. This is a very
well. See, I actually took it the other way around. In my original notes, I wrote I thought the intrigue of the series was that robots were the original sentient life in the universe, and they invented organics, basically out of a curiosity, exploration, scientific discovery. They created organic life. They are the original, and the whole series would be us discovering that truth.
And then organics then
create robotics because they're just like their creators, right? They're like, we have this curiosity, and So I thought that was an interesting direction that could have gone. And again, to have that kind of speculation from the first trade. It's just, and then, the series ultimately has plenty more twists and turns.
Yes.
It's not
but there is something that the story seeds are there, because we're talking about all these various aspects to the world. What defines a human? Obviously the Tim series was specifically designed and meant to be as human as possible, because they were meant to be a companion robot. They were meant to feel emotion and empathy and connection. Like that was the explicit purpose of that line of robots. So the idea then comes up of, what does it mean to be human? What does it mean to be robot? Is Tim acting like this? Does he actually feel, or is that his emotion sensors turned up? And is it any different than a human?
And in light of what we would not have probably read otherwise because of Pluto, I'm like, oh, he actually does look a little Adam-ish.
There is,
These are some of the questions that Adam asks, or at least Pluto asks, about the line between humanity and robots. But
but it's the similar thing. Well, I think especially in the second volume, when we meet Tim 22, which is basically like the sociopathic version, like the one that feels like no empathy, just does his job or whatnot. But so the idea that, okay, but then the question comes into, is that something you can actually adjust, or is that nature versus nurture?
Right. Well, they do tell him to turn down his emotional level settings.
And he's basically like, I can't, this is what I do, because that's how Tim was raised, in a loving family with a brother and a loving mother, versus Tim 22, who is basically raised in a robot cult,
Right.
So then it comes, so having those two characters there, the same model, and obviously eventually Tim 22, they do the hair color joke thing, because the idea that they can do that, tell them apart, avoid confusion there. But the idea of having those two characters together, two robot characters, yet respond to the world completely differently, I think is meant to ask the questions about nature versus nurture when we're talking about an AI being. There's also talking, as there are any story about robots and AI, about again the stand-in for robots being others, the bigotry of the world, the idea that robots are created as being servants, and thus they are second class. And so how they are treated and how they are viewed by the majority, quote unquote, or their creators, quote unquote, which are things that come in every story. And then so add in on the idea that the harvesters come in and kind of annihilate some of their worlds and kill a lot of people then. And so thus this rampant anti-robot movement shows up, like no robots, can't have anything there. So you have people like Andy, as you find out, as a scrapper. They're just bounty hunters. They go and just collect robots. Doesn't matter what they're doing. Doesn't matter what function they serve. Just go out and get all robots. There are no robots out in the world that can do and serve any function, because of the events of the Harvard, of what happened with the harvesters, an event that nobody has any idea what it meant, or what, like it was such a huge event, and yet everyone draws massive and definitive conclusions as to what it meant, and yet we have people like the UGC. They're trying to figure out. It's hinted at the idea that the leader of the UGC, he wants Tim because he wants to create his own harvesters. He wants to have his nuclear deterrent against the harvesters that are ever coming back. And so again, these are all very they're very tropic ideas when it comes to this type of story.
Right.
But yet they don't feel stale, right? Because of the veil that they put on.
From a friend of mine that broke my heart that said like this was all cookie cutter generic stale stuff. And I was like, I mean, he's playing with familiar themes and ideas, but he's blended them into a new dish.
I agree with that. Yeah. So I see what your friend is saying there, because I don't think, but in a similar way, I think about when I remember this distinctly, when Lost premiered, the TV show. I remember watching it and being like, hey, that pilot was really awesome. But also I remember saying, I think to my brother at the time, being like, yeah, it's pretty stock at times, like you got the reluctant hero, mysterious old man,
right?
You have the pregnant woman, you got the comic relief, you got the drug addict, the shady guy with the past, the shady girl with the past, the couple of the characters that don't speak English, you got the estranged father son. Like, these are all very tropic characters, very 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 archetypal. And of course the show is much more than that. That's just a setup,
right.
And those elements are there almost because you expect a story like that to be there. You expect those characters to be there for a story like that. But it's not about that. It isn't about those character archetypes. It isn't about those story elements that are so familiar. In Lost case, with the crash survivors, the stranded survivors kind of thing. A story like this, you're right, has all of these elements that you would expect to have when you're talking about humans and robots and AI and what does that mean, and the relationship between those two. We'll call them species, right? These are the sci-fi elements that 100% are well-worn territory. But I think that's all you see.
Well-worn for a reason,
that's all
right?
you see. Yeah. Oh yeah, of course. Yeah. You expect them to be there, because if they weren't there, if there was no commentary on like robot human relations and the way that humans view and treat robots, it would feel like a hole, right? You'd read it and you'd be like, well, why are they not talking about this thing here? This obvious thing. So it's almost like you have to address them because they work. But if that's all you see in the story, then I think you're clearly missing like the next level. And I feel sorry for your friend there if they didn't get past that initial, because that's the surface level read of Descendant.
I agree.
That's just the upper crust. And because it's not about all of that. It isn't, as we talked about, it's not about what the UGC is and what they're trying to do and what's happening on is the planet called Nish?
Boy, yeah, but the planet
Nishian?
names in general.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. But in terms of where we see a lot of action, because that's where Tim and they were taking that. They're the scrappers are there. They're seemingly like the most fervent anti-robot. So you don't have to know everything that goes on Nish or on the various planets with the UGC. All that stuff. It's not that it's window dressing. It's just that isn't what the story is actually about. It's something that you and I talk about a lot, right? It's that there is the setup for the story, any story that travels and works and on all of the ways you expect a story like that to work. It's like it has to hit these elements. It has to address them. But that's not what's going on in the story. So that's just the surface level read.
Right.
You have to set it up there. Yeah, exactly.
By the way, you have this page in the back of whether you're reading trade or deluxe.
Yes. Yeah. Which gives a breakdown.
Which is the atlas of the core planets of the UGC.
They put that. I think that is in the back of
every single trade. I think.
Well, it's in the back of every single trade. It was initially, I think, in the back of the single issues. I think just for the first arcs, the first 5 or 6 issues has that. They stopped including that after a while. I think at some point either they realized you already had that information somewhere, or it was no longer important to constantly break out what the various Confederation of Planets were at that point. But yeah, that is it. The information is there. again, that's all world building stuff that Lemire typically in his books is not like super concerned about, like the organization, like the hierarchy, the chain of command of the UGC, how the relationship between all these planets, who does what. That's the kind of world building stuff that he typically doesn't do in his books. It's never that important. It's never that granular. It's never that detailed that he's got to put a Jonathan Hickman like data page into his comic. It's usually not something that goes that deep. So,
no, but I think that's what kind of reader I am, because
I love it, but
I don't
creator,
right, and I don't like I don't like having nothing there where it's like just story, and I'm like, this world universe just doesn't make any sense at all. And then when I try to read something where it's just like the first 90 pages of the sci-fi book are them talking about the treaties between two different groups, and I'm like, I still don't know the name of any character. Right? It's like, what are you doing here? You're not telling me a story. You're just writing an encyclopedia.
It's literally a history book of this, and not there's a way to do a happy median there. And again, I think Lemire in his stories, and this is true again, whether it's this book here or even with Little Monsters, the book he just did also with Dustin Nguyen, when these guys get together, they know that the backstory, the origin, whatever inciting incident, whatever true idea fills in the backstory is going to be second. It's going to come later. They're going to get you in with characters and environment. Here's the world you're in now, and you'll figure out the rules of the world as we go, as we tell you. We don't need to explain them all now. We'll get there. We'll get there when we get there. And I think that's where he sides on with Descender, that you're dropped into the world and you learn as you go. You're being told things as you need to know them. Which again, I think why maybe you bump a little, or you did bump a little on volume 2, because no one knew anything about the Hardwire.
Right.
Like, because we were learning that. Obviously, Tim was learning that. But again, so was Quan, so was Tesla. Like they of course, how do they view the Hardwire? They view that robot community as terrorists, right? Because they're out bombing things, doing whatever, trying to further their agenda. So they know nothing about them. So they are learning this information as we are learning this information. Versus, like, you don't need two characters to talk about the interworld relationships between the capital, the main building, the main planet, and one of the outer lighting ones, because those characters live in that world. They would know that. They don't need to talk about things that they would know. So there's a little ham-handedness, little clunkiness of having to work through all that exposition. However we get it in volume 2 there. So
yeah. Well, now that I've defended the nits that other people picked, I do have my most, or like the nitpick that, even as I looked back on it after loving the series, I still had this nitpick. And amazingly, it doesn't bother me like it used to, but I always hated the character Digger.
Oh.
Or Driller.
Driller.
Driller. Yeah.
Driller.
Yeah, because
Driller's a killer. Driller's
yes.
a killer.
I was like, it just doesn't make any sense to me to have this robot that they couldn't bother to program in proper language. It's like, what is this that they give him, like, this broken English because he is smart enough to speak, but not enough to just download a full language package. Like, it just never makes sense to me. And that feels the tropiest. And I remember when I was reading it the first time, I was like, okay. As long as I don't have like a full issue where I just follow Driller for an entire issue, which sure enough, I'm pretty sure the series does do.
Yes.
But I didn't hate him this time through. And that's like, the usage of him in the first 2 trades anyway is good and appropriate. And I do think what you mentioned earlier about him, his very black and white view of all these different shades of like, oh, these are robots and these are humans and these people are in-betweeners. And he's like, don't care.
Yeah.
It's flesh or it's not.
Yeah.
His lack of nuance is actually helpful from a storytelling perspective.
Yeah, that there's someone there who is at the most.
So even my least favorite thing
level,
about the story from my memory, I am slowly coming around.
Well, and I Driller is a character. He is one of the more fascinating characters, and we will definitely talk about him more as we go through the series, because he is a character that gets so much more than what he is initially given here. Because he's effectively comic relief, despite his thing being Driller.
So he felt like a character from another story, and a character that was like kid friendly or whatever. And I was like, oh, is this book like more kid friendly? And then you have to watch gruesomely as they saw a man's arm off.
Yes, yeah.
And it's like, this is not a children's series.
But you are on some level the character that Driller, the place in the group. If we talk about our found family here, right? At least initially, we have Tim, we have Captain Tesla and her was it Tullen, her like second in command. Yep. They find Dr. Kwan. They go then search out and find Tim 21. Tim has his pet dog Bandit, and then there is Driller. So we talk about that ragtag group there. The position that Driller occupies in that group is the comic relief guy, for lack of a better term, like he's the fat one, he's the silly one, right? Because obviously the way he's drawn, his physique and all that, it would be the comic relief. And there is humor in the way he refers to Bandit and to Tim and everybody else. The Driller is a killer mantra. Like there is humor in that, as dark as some of it may be. But you're right, he doesn't feel like not any other character. He doesn't feel like any other robot that we see, right? Because obviously we see a ton of robots. So there is a sense of like, what is this character? And I think you're kind of maybe not supposed to. Maybe you're supposed to ask those questions as to why is he this way? What went on with him to make him this way? And I think you will see that to foreshadow a little going forward throughout the series. You'll get more and more Driller. And that character becomes so much more full. I was going to say fleshed out, but I don't want to offend Driller by doing that.
The worst thing you could say about him.
Yeah, but that becomes a much fuller character, and then you can look back on these opening issues, opening stories with him, and get much just a full, complete idea of who and what Driller is. So, but yeah, I can see there's a jarring aspect to him now. Just you're like, wait, what story are you in? Are you in the story with everybody else? There is he feels a little fish out of water.
Yeah. But it also helps set an expectation for the balance and the tension, and like this isn't
good point.
Self-serious of a story that, because I think one of the hard things is when you're reading comics and you're reading sci-fi, you have to weed out the wrong kind of sci-fi reader pretty quickly. You also have to find your audience. You're like, this is for someone who,
you got to set your tone.
I give this to people, even though it's not comedy in the same way, but thinking back to 2016, 2017, when I was giving this to people, the comp, and this is very loose, was that if people liked Guardians of the Galaxy, I would let them read Descender, not because of the raunchy comedy of Guardians of the Galaxy, but because this has the same relationship to sci-fi as a genre that Guardians does. It's kind of like, we jump through wormholes, we travel, it's found family. It's a lot of the similarities, but like Guardians of the Galaxy is like, there's these wars between these planets and stuff, but don't really worry about that. This is about our found family. So it was very loose and very sloppy, and it may have resulted in people not liking it because of the comp I made.
I'm torn, because the more I think about it, the more I think that's actually pretty decent comp.
But take away the comedy from Guardians, which is the defining attribute.
Yeah.
And so it's it's I can see where I've created
comedy.
A stumbling block for people.
Yeah.
But I'm like, I could see a James Gunn coming in and doing Descender. Right?
Yeah.
He could totally do that.
Just taking it back 10 minutes here, Drax is Driller.
Yes, Drax is Driller.
That's when I talked about the the space that Driller occupies in the group, the position he occupies, is that comic relief side there. Just it's a different kind of comedy. But no, the more I think about it, the more I'm finding less and less holes in your Guardians comp there. I actually think that's pretty good.
It's just not comedy forward.
No,
Guardians
it's
is
not,
comedy
it's not,
forward.
It's not.
It's leading comedy.
But there are aspects to it that you're right. I think you're
well,
and
I also there, think of the Andy and Star-Lord comparison, right?
Oh,
it's
yeah.
Traumatic childhood, abandoned.
Yeah.
Now you're kind of a scrapper, questionably moral dude, but it doesn't take much to bring you back to your moral center.
Exactly. Yeah. Because we see Andy when we meet up with him, he basically dooms an entire colony of people by taking their robots who are just really trying to keep people alive. Yeah. That's a tough look. There's a great bit there though, the way that's paneled where the robot's pleading for their lives. And it's basically like, UGC hasn't sent supplies. We're the only thing keeping it alive. Like there are children here. And that's a close-up of like Andy's eyes, who we don't know is Andy yet, of course.
Right.
He's a scrapper. He's got a mask on. We just see his eyes, but it's a close-up there. And it just has the robot saying, like there are children here. And then page turn, half page splash. He's walking away from the colony and he's dragging the six robots with him behind him. And it's like, dude, like that's hardcore. But you're right.
And this time knowing, on a reread, that's Andy, and you're like, I wish this weren't the intro.
Yeah.
Because I remember liking this guy, especially after reading Ascender.
But we see what happens there, though, as soon as he finds out about Tim.
Right.
He goes after it, and he refers to it. He refers to Tim as his brother. This is, as my companion. And there's no sense yet in his eyes that he wants to go and destroy Tim. He's a completely different person. Yeah. So no, I think there's a comp there with Star-Lord. There's not a great guy, but there's a heart there. I think there are more comparisons. I think the longer I workshop that, the more I can get on board with you there. So I don't think that's
again, yeah, but it's like you wouldn't watch the first Guardians movie and read the first two issues of this and be like, oh, it's basically the same thing.
That's fair.
It's a very wide angle lens where you have to view it and squint a little bit. Let's talk about that Tim-Andy relationship, because I think it was handled so perfectly in issue 2. Issue 2, you're moving Tim out of his house. He's exploring. He's woken up. It's 10 years later. Mm-hmm. But every other page, you've got them side by side, is the monochromatic flashback. And by the way, if Tim doesn't look enough like Adam, you have Trinket Tocket, who definitely looks like Astro Boy.
Yeah.
So there's that nugget there for you. But I found that upload in progress being an incredibly effective way to just literally download story to your brain. Here's the backdrop for you in the under the guise of him uploading and syncing with the database and recovering time.
Yeah.
Just
I think that issue paired with issue 8, which is the same setup, but the story is told from Andy's point of view.
Yes.
The idea. So we get Tim's waking up his creation, learning about what he is and what his role is going to be, and his first meeting with Andy. And then we see that then in issue 8, we get Andy's backstory of him and his mother and the kind of kid Andy was. And then we see that same meeting again when Tim shows up, and we see it now from Andy's perspective all the way through the moment where their mining colony kind of went away, the day the harvesters came up. But those two issues mirroring each other again with the monochromatic flashback scenes every other page. There's something really beautiful about that. And of course we at this point now we have just met Andy, and we know that like, oh, this is what this dude is. Again, also super archetypal, right?
Yeah.
He's this. When we see him, we meet him, we only know him through Tim's eyes when he's this sweet boy who's his friend and his brother. And then we jump ahead 10 years and he's just like this grizzled, like apparently completely heartless scrapper, and that's so the next time the audience sees him. And so there's there's an immediate and obvious disconnect that creates conflict, which is, it's a well-worn story path there. But I think it's effective jumping back here as we see the person that Andy is versus not only how he grew up, but what his relationship, the way he views Tim. I think that was important here because we understand how Tim views Andy and Andy's mom as his brother and his mother. We understand from the robot's perspective how he views the people he was with. But here we fully get Andy's perspective on how he sees Tim. And the way that he sees Tim is probably different than the way that anyone else received Tim or their Tim line of robots. The way that he felt, really truly felt that Tim was his brother. He was part of the family. It wasn't just there for companionship to be a friend. Like, this was actually his brother. There's something genuine there that comes from maybe some of that childlike wonder, the isolation that Andy felt as a kid, or whatever it was. There was something real and genuine there. So it wasn't just a one-way street the way that the robot interpreted the interaction, but that we see now that it was truly
authentic.
It was two-way. It was real. And I think that's an important bit there for Andy's history, which then informs all the things he does afterwards in terms of like, I'm going to do everything I can to track down Tim, including like, he as he mentions, like what did he say? Like he finds Bandit right in the fighting pit,
right?
And he's like, oh, I can use Bandit to find Andy. They're connected there. And then the guy he's with is like, well, so why do we take the robot and the other guy? It was basically like, well, I can't kill the UGC officer, and if I didn't take Driller, like Bandit wouldn't go anywhere. So it's like, I'll do whatever it takes. I'll take all these other people here. I'll go see my ex-wife,
right.
The person I don't want to see, who doesn't want to see me, because I'm going to take all these steps because I have to find Tim. And at this point, he doesn't care what Tim's potential use is to the UGC, right? The idea of this codex and relationship to the harvesters, or any connection he might have had to what I'm sure Andy considers the worst day of his life, right? He just wants to find his brother. He wants to find Tim. That's all that matters.
Yeah. And I'm done pushing the Guardians comparison, but I do want to talk about our emotionally calloused blue/green skinned female.
Yeah.
who
badass.
Who is loyal, right? Good fighter. Who is the daughter of a powerful galactic leader seeking a deterrent weapon. Again, no comparison to Nebula or Gamora.
Probably Gamora, Effie, aka the Queen Between, maybe a little more Nebula.
Right, I think that's
idea.
I was thinking the other way. Well, in appearance, yes.
In appearance, yes. Yeah.
In the Gamora is the love interest, and Nebula is the Stone Cold Killer. But anyway, I think she, in these two volumes, Telsa, whatever,
Telsa.
Is the worst tropey of tropes. I think there's more to come, and there's more into the surface, and that. And
she's the most basic right now, yes.
Right, you don't get any real glimpses of it. You're just kind of taking for granted because of tropes.
Yeah,
that there's going to be more to this character in the end, but just kind of like unbearably rigid, and everyone around her even knows like this. There's something underneath. Stop being this way.
And what I appreciated was, from the tropey aspect, I appreciated that Quan clocked it immediately.
Yes.
And he's like, why are you here? Why'd they send you? What's up with that?
Right.
And she deflects. And then, of course, when then we find out, oh, yeah, she's the daughter of the head general of the UGC,
Don't call him Thanos.
Yeah. But the idea that isn't just, they didn't drop that out of nowhere. That at least someone, you're right, the characters in the story can recognize that, like, she's pushing a little too hard, right? She's holding on a little too tight, right? Why is it so important? But I do think I agree with the idea that the reader is left to fill in some gaps there, because yes, we see the rigidity and the militaristic aspect of it, but we also see that there is a loyalty and a protection. She doesn't want Tim walking around this place on his own.
Right. Well, and after the big revelation,
of Dr.
Quan, she the most we get of her backstory is she does the comparison of like, I had to work twice as hard because my dad didn't want me here.
Yeah. Yeah.
And meanwhile, you stumble onto something, steal it, doom the galaxy, and are a celebrity. Like, this is completely unfair. We are the complete opposite people.
And we get the idea that I guess we see that flashback. Her mother was killed by the harvester. So specifically there, which probably then is resentment also from the father. There are a lot of daddy-daughter issues there. That always come in, almost are always at play when we're talking about a father-daughter relationship within a militaristic structure. Again, all very tropish, but the fact that it's within story, but we're starting to see that now that she's here, there is, and again, Quan teases her about that as well. That maybe she has some idea of wanting to protect Tim, not because he's an asset to the UGC, but because she's just got a bad vibe about the place they're at and thinks he might be in trouble,
Yeah.
So that you have Quan, who is ostensibly, again, not a great character, kind of a jerk, but yet he is able to read. He does have the ability to read and sense, and hey, there's something else going on with you. You're right though. We just don't get that yet with Telsa. It's just it's all set up for her. Her character journey is really barely beginning in these first two issues. I guess you can only do so much when you start the story out there. But I agree.
It's not a criticism of Lemire and Nguyen. It's just like, that's just where we are with her. She's not the main character.
Because of where we arbitrarily decided to stop. Yeah, she is the least served in terms of full depth character of our main group.
And actually, to me, the most interesting, stopping at volume 2, is Dr. Quan.
Yeah.
I want to know why he's still on board for an adventure. He's made his dark confession now.
Yeah.
And his whole reputation can crumble. But I think he has such a morbid curiosity about where this will go, what's in Tim 21's head. Can we summon this harvesters back? Even if they destroy us all, I think he's academically curious about it.
And I think this is what's important about his backstory, is that, yes, he plagiarized the work. Yes, he took it from this ancient robot there. But he was already on the path to study this stuff. So this was actually something he was already doing.
He just cut in line.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think in terms of his backstory, and he tries to say that too. This was kind of like the Jurassic Park argument of like, yeah, okay, I took the whatever, fine, but I still did a whole bunch of stuff on my own, right? Like not everyone could have gotten the same end that I got to. So he's
100%,
he's still trying
and he's
to say,
right. He's right.
There's probably truth there. So
not everyone could have found an ancient robot
and
built the Tim series.
Yes, there is something there about his desire to stick around. There also is a question why anyone else wants to keep him around, because it's clear as soon as he's in trouble, he throws anybody else the bus.
Negotiate only for himself, and it's like, bro, there's two of you, and she's your ride home.
I know, yeah,
guy
ride home, and also clearly the more capable of the two. So maybe stick with her. Yeah, no. So there is a question of his value though is because despite him revealing the source of his technology breakthroughs, he still knows it better than anybody else. So there is still something there. He is still the one that could repair and revive Tim. So there is a level of expertise there. Even if he doesn't know the origin and can't speak to that, he is still the expert. So he's not a fraud in the way I think he's in that moment when he confesses. I don't think he's a level of fraud that maybe he thinks he is in that moment. There is a level of deception there, but he's still a useful and worthwhile person to have around. Someone you want on your side.
He is a useful mind, but not a helpful character.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah. That's fair. Yeah. Because again,
so it's like, I need the stuff inside you, but if there's any way to get it other than having you around.
Yeah, if you just not
everyone would do that.
Yeah, if you could just not talk, unless we need you for something specific. But yeah, no, I think we see the most out of Quan. We get the most backstory with him. And I think that makes sense because of his relationship to not only, as we find out, the harvesters and robotics in general, but not, specifically Tim. Again, it comes down to everyone in Tim 21, everyone in Tim's orbit, and the way they interact with him, and the way he interacts with them. That's the heart of the story. That's what it's about. We talk about found family, a ragtag team of people. It's everyone who comes into contact with Tim, be it a human, be it driller, be it bandit, whatever it is. Everyone is affected in some way by Tim, and I think that's we're starting to see that in Telsa, and we've already seen it now in Quan, and we see it actually more in Quan's backstory, in which I guess was really Tim's backstory, as he initially considers Quan as his father, a creator or whatnot, so the setup there is good for these characters. There's stuff there to go, and I look forward to getting more into it, because Telsa is an interesting character. She hasn't gotten enough to do yet. Her main role is to stand around and be mean and yell at people. So,
right. Yeah. She's mean and she's callous, and I respect that.
Yes. Yeah.
People said the same about me, but,
but that's just the wall you put up, because you need that as a starting point, because then it's easy to show growth by having that wall come down, Now you have emotion. Now you have connection and empathy, and that's like automatic character growth there. Not you. I'm talking about Telsa.
No, yeah. No, I would never grow as a character. I've got decades of data back that up.
It's a lot of scar tissue.
So those are actually all my notes. I feel like we hit the world building an appropriate amount, which is to say not much. It's like, here's some planets, here's the UGC, here's the terrorist cell. And the one thing I think I maybe pointed out before we started recording, which was that I like that it's not Star Wars. Because in Star Wars, there are two factions, good guys and bad guys.
Yes. Yeah.
And I'm like, for being this infinite galaxy with hundreds and thousands of planets and all this other stuff, for everyone to boil down into black and white, good and bad, which I know newer Star Wars content is starting to break down those barriers a little bit.
But OG Star Wars is
Lucas's vision for Star Wars was very dualistic.
Luke is wearing white, Leia is wearing white, Vader's wearing black, Han Solo is wearing white and black. What does that mean?
Right, and you're in the Empire.
Yes.
Or you're in the rebellion. And those are the two factions.
Yeah.
So
I have one last thing if you want to wrap up. Yeah. My last thing here is is talking about a little bit of the craft, which depending on the story, sometimes we touch on, sometimes we don't. But I think this is a story where I really want to highlight the work of Steve Wands, because lettering does a lot of work, whether you're paying attention to it or not. And I'm not just talking about the various fonts. So whether you're human or robot, what kind of robot, the various fonts they use, some, we can quibble on some of the ones that are easier or harder to read, depending on how your eye is or how big the page you're reading is on. That's a different story there. But the fact that they use so many different fonts to depict different species of robots and humanoids or whatnot. But beyond that, I think a real subtle thing that I don't know how many people recognize, the word balloons are different. Humans all speak in circular and rounded word balloons. All the robots speak in square or rectangular-ish.
Rounded rectangle, yeah.
Yes. He says, like Tim speaks in a rectangle. Some of the other robots you see, like with the hardwire, speak in like rounded rectangle. But so what that does is you get this, but you combine that with the fact that when Tim speaks, he has the same font as humans do. So visually, the lettering is the same for his speech as a robot versus the other robots we see that maybe look more like robots per se, like Driller, some of the robots we see at the Hardwire group, Like the one main robot leader that Quan kind of needles is like, what kind of robot are you? Were you maybe a culinary robot, a kitchen robot kind of thing? And he dismissed like, what I did before is no big deal. But that robot there who looks more like a robot, his text is different. And yet his speech is kind of that rounded rectangle. So even the shape there gives it away on both the speech bubble size, the shape of that, and the lettering. So this is a non-humanoid that's speaking. Like even in your mind, you read it differently. But Tim gets that mixed use, and both Tims do. Tim 22 is the same way, where the voice is meant to be human because the lettering is the same, but yet he gets the rectangular boxes, not the circular.
And it's also how characters perceive them, right? Because it's every time you hear a Tim talk, there's something familiar and something different, whether you're human or a robot.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so it's that subtle thing of like, if you weren't really paying attention, it sounds like a human, right? But there's a little subtle difference that says it's still robotic. Versus when you talk to Driller, you're like, that's a robot. There's no question there. That's full robot. So yeah, whether you're getting that, and sometimes early on they use, and maybe they did it with some of the news briefings. The way maybe the voiceover or the text box, maybe it's colored differently to show different robot types. I think I don't have his name written down. But Telsa's second in command, the Tullum.
Oh yeah, no, his name didn't register for me.
Yeah.
I think that's right though.
Yeah, but so he gets stuck with Driller and Bandit in the fighting pits. When you see him speak, because of his race, his species, there's a waviness around his text. I think that's kind of the niche like that as well. The whatever species is the precog species, the way that their thoughts, their speech is portrayed is a way that you typically, if you see that kind of telepathic talk, the way it's like double lined and things like that, little wavy. And so there are so many ways that characters communicate in this story, and it really all falls on the letterer there. And I think Steve Wands has a workout in this book. He has so much to do, and I think it's abundantly clear. And even if you didn't clock something like the shape of the word balloons being different, because it's pretty obvious to see when the text is different, especially when it goes to some of the robot text, and it's
your font and the color background and things like that.
Yeah,
that are obvious.
It's gone full bold. The type width is different. It's super obvious. If you didn't clock something like the shape and size of the actual text balloons themselves, whether they're circular or rectangular, those things are subconscious. When you see them over and over again, they may not jump out at you, but putting that work in, and being that focused on that kind of detail, it matters, and it sets a book apart. And you register that subliminally, whether or not you know it consciously, and that there is something a little different about Tim, and that the robot speech is always going to be different. When you're reading, who's speaking. Is it a human? Is it a robot? If it's a Tim version of a robot versus again an older version, a more robotic version of a robot. Something like that. All these things are subconscious and subliminal. That it shows the care and effort that they put into the story, that they went out of their way to make all of these different for the reader, to differentiate, to both help the reader, again, whether it's explicitly or implicitly, whether or not you pick it up, it's there on the page, and your mind is going to register that one way or another.
Yeah, no, that's a brilliant call out, and I was picking up on it on a subliminal level, but now that it's been made explicit, it's totally going to change how I read volumes 3 and 4.
It's one of those things now. If I, now that I've said it's all you can see, now you will probably continue reading it and being like, oh, right now you can't unsee it. You'll be seeing who speaks in a square, who speaks in a circle, things like that.
Well, now I feel like, why wasn't there an Eisner lettering for Wands in this series?
I know. Yeah. I'd have to double check and see if he was nominated for this or not.
I would love to
letter.
know what beat this, though. It's like just in the 11 issues that we read, I feel like, yeah, don't give it to him every year, but give him one, because the storytelling through lettering that he did here, through bubble shapes.
He does a lot of work, and I have to think this is something that they maybe worked on as part of a full team of like, how do we differentiate these things,
Yeah, I suspect so.
Yeah,
but I think in light of this revelation, I understand why Lemire does not shop letterers. Yeah. He doesn't, and like everything is Steve wants, because whatever Jeff had in mind, this had to be it or better.
I would imagine. Yeah.
And it's really curious that Steve is the only one who gets let in on Lemire's solo ventures.
Because I mean, he needs a letterer.
Writing and right. But when he's writing and drawing, he's like, I don't mess around. I go to Steve Wands for my letters.
Mm-hmm.
And it's because the guy can just deliver.
Trust there. Yeah. There's clearly a trust in terms of something about Lemire's voice when he writes, whether it's him just writing or writing and drawing. There's something in the way he does story and dialogue that clearly he understands that Steve Wands just gets, and is the person he wants portraying that on page. Which again, I don't think we think about letterers in that way. We think about, oh, this guy wants to work with an artist over and over again because they're comfortable. They talk about story together and they're on the same page, literally, and that they can execute a vision together. We don't think about letterers that way. But I think it speaks to what that relationship can be, of when you work with a guy over and over again, that he reads your scripts and can just know, okay, this is what he's going to need on the page. This is how it's going to look. This is how it's going to translate when there's art on the page, whether Lemire is drawing it himself or it's one of his collaborators. He just knows how the rhythm is going to go of the dialogue. Yeah, I think he's that comfortable with it, and I think that's really cool to see a partnership like that, which is unexpected versus again, writer artist combos happen all the time. So
right, I mean, to me, it feels like just because we've gone an hour without making a West Wing reference, it feels like the Sorkin Tommy Schlamme relationship, where Sorkin frequently says in interviews, like, people always credit me with the walk and talk, but I just write scripts. I've never had anything to do with the walking. That's all Tommy reading the words on the page and saying, let me show you how this can come to life. And the long takes and things like that. It's like he didn't alter the speech or the language or, the content of what's being said, but he delivers it in such a way that you now can't picture Sorkin words coming out any other way. Yeah, so even when other directors have taken on Sorkin stuff now, they're like walking and talking and cutting through they're doing long takes because like one fellow creative came along and interpreted their work in such a way that the original creator now writes with that in mind. And definitely, it's unbelievable. Yeah.
So no doubt. So no, I think that's something to keep in mind, keep to watch out for. And lettering isn't one of those things I don't think you're supposed to pay attention to. You're supposed to read it, and it's supposed to be seamless. That is kind of the job of a letterer, is to do the work and get the story out there and literally get the words on the page. But I think when it's something like this, when there are so many varied instances that are story relevant, like we're not just doing different fonts for the hell of it. We're not doing it just because we can. Their insights into characters, and it changes how you read and relate to the various characters depending on what their letters, what the font is for their words. It changes how you read them and how you interpret them. So all this is story and character critical. So when someone is putting so much work into it, effort into it, the way that Wands is here, I think it's worth noting. Even that does mean going forward, you're just staring at you're staring at word balloons the whole time.
Yeah, no, I think I can keep processing it on about the same level, but just have a new appreciation for it as I go.
Sure. Indeed.
But yeah, it's one of those things that's very easy to miss.
Yeah.
And, just to call back to the lettering, a couple books ago, we did Cognetic, and there was a little bit of storytelling there with the color of the letters, but it didn't actually change much about, it didn't change the bubbles or anything like that.
No.
And
it was more just to show like I'm using my power right now. When I speak without it, it's normal, but not when I'm engaged with my ability, now it goes with the color. That just happens to be the one that's assigned to me. Yeah, it doesn't mean anything else.
And in that book, I think that was a clever way to do it, and it was helpful to the reader, but the reader didn't have to spend a lot of time thinking about it.
Yeah.
Although I will say, if you are someone who's colorblind or has other accessibility issues, that book, the letters are probably pretty difficult to read, yellow text on white background.
Yeah.
Whereas Steve has found a way to communicate all these different things without compromising the readability of anything.
They're different fonts and different widths, font sizes, things like that. Yeah. Not wholly reliant on color.
Right. So anyway, great call out. And one that I think will pay dividends for readers moving forward.
I think so. Yeah, it's one of those things that you just keep in mind that once you notice it, you don't have to call it every time, but it'll just help you in terms of paying attention to character without having to pay attention to character. You don't have to call it out every time, but if you notice it enough, it becomes ingrained, and that'll help you as you move forward in terms of, as the world grows and expands, we get more characters in there and things like that. It's one of those easy signifiers that once you know it and once you're aware of it, it sticks with you and informs how you read all these new characters that we haven't even met yet. As the world gets bigger, how they're going to fall, what they're going to read like, because you're already primed. You're primed to be ready for it.
Exactly.
As the story as the story comes forward, you're aware of it. It's not overpowering now, but you're on the right setting to move forward to allow the world to expand some more.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right. Well, if you don't have anything else, which I certainly don't want to cut you off after you drop a bomb like that one.
No, I don't. I want to make sure we got through everything first, and then end on the lettering bit there. So no, I'm out on my notes here. So I think I'm good.
Good deal. By the way, the only other thing that I wanted to make note of is that this doesn't always happen with trades when they're written in single issue, but they do all have titles.
Oh, that is true. Yeah.
10 Stars is volume 1, which actually off the top of my head, I can't remember why it's called 10 Stars. Machine Moon is volume 2. That's very obvious.
That's what they call. That's what the Hardwire called their place. Yeah, there was something there. 10 Stars. I think that was something in the. That's a good point. I
don't recall off the top of my head.
I clocked the names, but I didn't consider them as I was reading. I think it might have been something that from the backstory of I'm sure it was Tim's creation, maybe with Dr. Kwan, something about that. Probably something along those lines there. But yeah, maybe something to keep thinking about going forward. With the other volumes as to how they may relate to the overall story. That's a good point. As I wasn't thinking about that this time through.
So with that, read Volume 3, Singularities, Volume 4, Orbital Mechanics, and we will see you back here next week. And those single issues, you know them off the top of your head?
I got no. I wrote them down because my memory isn't that good anymore. That is single issues 12 through 21. So if you have the deluxe, the 2-part deluxe editions, that will be spanning the end of 1, the beginning of book 2. So volumes 3 and 4, issues 12 to 21.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you for listening, and we will see you next week.
Peace.